Well, I'm really excited that you've decided to join me for this webinar series. We're going to be talking about ancient NLP. When I first posted this on social media, somebody said to me, what, you're going to go all the way back to 1969? Actually, we're going to go back 5,000 years in this webcast. And some people say to me, of course, how is that possible? After all, Richard Bandler and John Grinder articulated the ideas of neuro-linguistic programming in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. But King Solomon said something amazing, and that is that there is nothing new under the sun. And we can see that even though it wasn't described as neuro-linguistic programming in early or ancient literature, the techniques, the methods, the ideas behind neuro-linguistic programming are actually ideas that have endured the test of time. Sure, Bandler and Grinder's fantastic contribution of systemizing this and helping us to really understand the mechanisms of neuro-linguistic programming are important. But the great thing about not limiting ourselves to a modern era approach to neuro-linguistic programming is that we can create new patterns from a wide range of different resources, both Eastern and Western. For those who I haven't had the chance to meet before, I'm Dr. Richard Nongard. I'm the president of the ICBCH. And when this webinar is over, I hope you're so excited and so enthused by the endless possibilities to look both in the current era and in years gone by to find methods that can truly help produce change, that you'll join me for our ICBCH double certification program. The program is all online, and participants in that course earn both certification as an ICBCH professional NLP practitioner, as well as an ICBCH certified life coach. I'm really looking forward to the content in today's webcast because you're going to end this webcast with a new set of ideas, a new set of strategies that are going to help you in the work that you do. Whether you're working in business or sales, or whether you're working in therapy or counseling, or whether you're working with individuals in your community, helping the community to become a better place and applying these principles in your own life as well. Let's get right into the material here. And by the way, I will provide you with a PDF of the course notes, so you don't have to worry about not being able to read my handwriting on the board. In fact, you'll find it right below this video. It's a PDF you can open up and print out with the notes that I have on the board here. But let's start by talking about what is neuro-linguistic programming. The reality is, if you ask this to just about anybody, you'll find a similar but different set of answers. I like to describe NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, as a psychological method. Now, I am licensed as a psychotherapist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been doing professional therapy now for 30 years, almost made myself older than I actually am. And I have used neuro-linguistic programming as a strategy to help my clients achieve their highest level of potential. As a certified professional hypnotist, I've incorporated the techniques of neuro-linguistic programming into the hypnotherapy that I offer to help people create faster responses, more predictable outcomes, and to help them achieve success at really a faster level than maybe they even expected themselves. So I view NLP as a psychological method. It deals with our emotions. It deals with our resource states. It deals with all of the aspects of how we go about thinking and how we can go about changing the automatic or the unconscious thought patterns. Neuro-linguistic programming is also a guide to interpersonal relationships. Would you like to be a more effective communicator? Would you like to be able to communicate more persuasively or with greater levels of influence? That's important if you have children. It's also important if you supervise employees. These communication and interpersonal guide skills that come from NLP have applications across relationships, both personal as well as professional. I'm very lucky that I was exposed to neuro-linguistic programming when I was just 18 years old. That was 37 years ago, maybe 38 years ago, because my birthday is this month. And the reality is, I've used the techniques and the strategies to build effective friendships, business relationships, and to navigate the difficulties of life in many different ways with the many different people I've encountered by being confident in my ability to use effective communication patterns to persuade, to influence, to bring people together, and to create a sense of community. Neuro-linguistic programming is really the systemizing of success. What Richard Bandler and John Grinder did in the late 1960s, early 1970s is they said, hey, let's take a look at some therapists who are known for being highly effective at helping people make change. They picked 3 people to look at originally. There have been many other exemplars in NLP over the years, but originally they looked at Fritz Perls, the creator of Gestalt therapy. So what is it about his language, the way he works with individuals, the techniques that he's using, produces such profound change? They looked at Virginia Satir from the Family Therapy Institute of California, a renowned family therapist. In any family therapy training program today, they still teach and talk about the methods of Virginia Satir. Bandler and Grinder worked with her to try to distill the techniques that she was using in her therapy to help families come together and function at their greatest level of potential. I went down to Phoenix, Arizona in the early 1970s and spent time with Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson was a medical doctor who was a renowned medical hypnotist. He was a psychiatrist and he treated individuals in his medical approach with hypnotherapy. He's really considered the father of modern medical hypnotherapy. They said, what separates Erickson from others? What language did he use? What techniques did he use? What methods did he use? And they asked a question. The question is, can we distill the techniques, the methods, the language of these highly successful change workers? And then can we teach these to other people so that they can be repeated? And the answer, of course, is yes. We can replicate the success of others. And so Bandler and Grinder really systemized the idea of creating success and provided models and patterns and strategies so that each one of us could actually step into our greatest potential version of ourselves and help other people, again, whether they're family, whether they're colleagues and coworkers, whether they're clients in therapy or coaching or hypnosis, to experience success as well. I think that NLP is also about creating an understanding between the yin and the yang, between the dual nature of people, between the mind-body, between the thoughts and the actions that people take, and between the patterns and the people of the planet Earth. All of these ideas related to neuro-linguistic programming are, of course, simple definitions. The great thing about neuro-linguistic programming is that it's really a big tent idea. There are a lot of different strategies underneath it, a lot of different teachers of NLP, and each one of them has brought their wisdom in unique ways to this profession. Robert Dilts, of course, was an early pioneer in NLP training, as was Steve and Connie Ray Andreas. The ideas, the contributions that they've made have expanded on our understandings and our definitions of NLP and helped us to create replicable patterns to truly help people experience success. Now, the N, of course, stands for neuro. That's the idea of our brain. And much of modern psychotherapy now concerns itself with the idea of brain science and neurons. And we understand how the brain synapses work and the chemical codes encode our previous experiences and produce responses with our unconscious mind. Bandler and Grinder, by paying attention to the neurological or the physical component of how NLP functioned, was an important way to simply differentiate between, we'll do the same thing this person did and you'll have the same outcomes, and brought it to a deeper level. The linguistic component, John Grinder was a linguist. He taught at the University of California as a language professor. And he understood that language represents, it symbolizes ideas, experiences, emotions, and that when we use language, we elicit behaviors, responses, and change by combining the mind with the tongue. We can teach people to program themselves for success. Let me ask you a question. What would you like to accomplish with your life? To what level of success would you like to rise? NLP gives you a system for understanding these ideas, for accessing that success, for creating important relationships in the world around you, and changing sometimes the stinking thinking, the psychological potholes along the way that keep us from rising to our greatest level of performance. Underneath all of this, though, is a foundation or the idea of modeling success. What Bandler and Grinder did was amazing. They went to highly successful people and they said, can we observe you? Can we work with you? Can we study you? Can we understand how it is that you've created their success so that we can then create ways of teaching other people to rise to the same level of success? In many NLP programs, many NLP training programs, those early ideas of Bandler and Grinder and the modeling and the patterns that they establish are consistently taught. In the upcoming ICBCH double certification program, I'm going to be talking about these core ideas, the patterns, the techniques, the exemplars that Bandler and Grinder identified and talked about. But we're also going to be doing something interesting. We're going to be looking not just at that period of the 1960s and 70s and 80s, but we're going to be looking at the current era. Are there new exemplars that we can model? Can we find people whose success that we can replicate in different and important areas of life? And then can we apply these to our coaching? Can we apply these to our hypnotherapy? Can we apply these to our psychotherapy, to our leadership, to our business acumen and the strategies that we use to help build a business? Can we apply these new exemplars and these new models to our own personal development and rise to our greatest level? Can we make this coming year the best year yet using these strategies? The answer to that is yes. And in our ICBCH double certification program, we're actually going to go back 5,000 years ago. We're going to say what systems have been written about and talked about that can help lead us into success using the ideas of NLP to create a new understanding of old ideas. Yes, I understand there was no NLP 5,000 years ago, but there was Guiguza, the ghost of Sage Valley. There was Sun Tzu and the art of war. There were many other strategy teachers who taught us not just about war, but about business, about community, about relationships, and about success. Those are the things that we're going to be exploring in the rest of this webinar. Those of you who have taken hypnotherapy certification, or those of you who are familiar with NLP, you know about the idea of anchoring. Bandler and Grinder described anchoring as the tendency of one element of an experience to revivify the whole experience. So an example of an anchor is you're walking through the mall and you hear a song on the radio or on the speakers overhead that was played at your wedding. And suddenly, although you're walking through the mall, you're walking down the aisle one more time or walking onto the dance floor in your mind to have that one dance one more time. This is the idea that when we have an emotion, a thought, an experience, when we have a cue in our environment, a sound, a feeling, a sight, a sense, a taste, a touch, that simple element can bring us back to a different time or place. By the way, sometimes it can bring us back to distressing events. Anchors are set naturally. They don't require a therapist. We all experience anchors every single day in our life, whether we have a therapist or whether we have a hypnotist or a coach or not. Many times we've set anchors to bring us back to anxiety, to depression, to distress. And part of the NLP or life coach's job is to help an individual to be able to break these anchors that have been set that revivify negative experiences and to set new anchors so they step into positive experiences. Now, in the world of hypnosis, there's a famous anchoring technique, right? Touch the thumb and index finger together, press them together. So a hypnotist will often have a person in hypnosis create a resource state, a state of joy, a state of confidence, a state of happiness, whatever it is they'd like to feel. They have them touch their thumb and index finger together. And then they give the post-hypnotic suggestion that anytime in the next day or two or week or two, you need to access this state of comfort or this state of calm or this state of confidence. You'll touch your thumb and index finger together. It'll bring you right back to where you are right now. This is a simple anchoring technique that's used very often in hypnotherapy. It was one of the first techniques in NLP or hypnosis that I was actually ever taught. But the idea behind NLP goes far beyond the conscious decision to engage in an action that brings us back to our previous experiences and helps us to deal with the unconscious reservoir that we've all created between our experiences and our outcomes, our experiences and our expectations. And it helps us to break the old patterns and to step into new patterns. Would you like to know how to do this in your own life so that you can reach your highest level of peak performance? Or help clients to be able to break these patterns and to step into a new pattern of success? Robert Dilts, one of the early pioneers in NLP education, referred to anchoring as stimuli that will constantly recreate. What's important here is the idea that when an anchor is fired, whether it's conscious or unconscious, it does predictably and consistently revivify that resource state that is going to be of value. So now we get into ancient NLP. I want to give you a couple examples before I talk about the ghost of Sage Valley and the wisdom that he gave us that actually changed the history of a nation and perhaps even the history of the world. Let's go over here and talk about the 9 hand seals, or Jiao Zi in the Chinese language. And it's both a Chinese and a Japanese strategy that's based on the Tao, the yin, the yang, the idea that everything coexists together. And that when we're experiencing, for example, a lack of confidence, we have the ability to access confidence. So the idea in the 9 hand seals as applied to martial arts is that certain seals, certain things that are done with the hand, certain signals are tied to a mantra, and that mantra can produce a resource state that's of value to the fighter, to the warrior, or to the father, or the leader, or the business executive. The great thing about the art of warfare is that it doesn't just deal with warfare, but deals with the ability to create internal resources. So there are 9 hand seals, and in this webcast, I don't have time to cover all of them, but we'll just talk about 2 of them. Rin, this is tied to a mantra of the thunderbolt and power, and it's done with this maneuver, or this hand seal. So when the martial artist creates this hand seal, they access that resource state that's going to be of value to them. 2, this is known as the outer lion. It's a hand seal that looks much like this with the thumbs. You've seen martial artists strike a pose, if you will, and create something with their hands. This is a symbol to them, an anchor that they've created to then access the resource state that's going to be able to help them in the challenging situation that they're facing. This is an example, of course, of anchoring from our ancient wisdom and our ancient understanding. And we don't have to go to the East. We can go into Hebrew thought. We can take a look at scripture verses. Chances are pretty good, and it doesn't matter if you're a believer or a non-believer. You probably are familiar with these verses. Psalm 23. Probably nobody watching this has ever watched a Western movie where there wasn't a funeral where the pastor read Psalm 23, right? Almost every funeral reads this passage, Psalm 23, even though I walk through the valley of death. Why? Because this passage has been anchored to creating comfort in difficult times. Matthew 6:28. Matthew 6:28 comes from the Beatitudes. It's again a calming verse. Jesus spoke and he taught and he said, look at the lilies of the field, right? They don't worry about what clothes they are going to wear. They don't spin and toil like you do. I'm paraphrasing here, of course, as you dwell on your anxiety. So trust in our Father. Again, these are strategies for creating resource states that come from a tradition we're familiar with. Psalm 139. Psalm 139 is a verse many people are familiar with, which gives us a sense of security because God has hemmed us in behind and before and knows the steps that we take. 1 Peter 5:7, 1 Peter 5:7 is a verse that has helped a lot of people to calm anxiety. Simply cast all your cares on him because he cares for you. What's fascinating about this is, again, these are consistent with anchoring resource states. These come from a cultural tradition that most of us are familiar with, that we've never thought about in the context of NLP. When we study NLP, we can see how the ancient wisdom, no matter what the source, were explanations and attempts to help us replicate the success of other people and step into the abundance that we've been promised in this life. Let's take a look here at an idea that doesn't come from 5,000 years ago, and it's not really directly related to anchoring, but I wanted to point out it's a good example of NLP before NLP was articulated. In the late 1920s, Roy Herbert Jarrett, he wrote a book titled It Works. And if you're familiar at all with the law of attraction in the literature in this genre, you're probably familiar with the red book called It Works by Roy Herbert Jarrett. Millions of people have read this book and created success, replicated the success of Roy Herbert Jarrett by following the 3 simple steps that he offered in his book. The first, create a list of everything that you want. Everything that you want, write that list, focus on that list. Take the things off that you don't really want. Add the things you really do want. The material things, the spiritual things, the psychological things. Write that list down of 10 things that you truly want. Take a few days to cultivate that list, and then take that list. Meditate on that list. Read that list. Enforce that list. Bring your attention to that list from morning through the noon and through the night. And the third step, of course, is keep it a secret. And what Roy Jarrett discovered was that it works. That when we focus on what we want, we can create what we want. This is an axiom that is true throughout time. Nobody's going to give us what it is we want. It has to be created from within. And neuro-linguistic programming gives us a skill set to be able to do that. Now I want to introduce you to some great ideas related to the ghost of Sage Valley, Guiguza. This was an ancient Chinese writer who lived thousands of years ago. And when I first became acquainted with the work of Guiguza, I was amazed at how the ideas of the Guiguza can actually change our experiences and give us wisdom in our current era. I'd like to pause for a second, though, just to invite you to the upcoming double NLP Life Coach certification offered completely online. Doesn't matter where on the world you are, you can attend this ICBCH NLP practitioner certification and life coach certification. Sometimes people say to me, why the two combined? The reason why is simple. NLP is rarely offered as a standalone technique. It's almost always offered in the context of coaching or therapy or hypnosis or consulting. And this program is designed to give you the leadership skills to apply NLP in a practical way in a number of different settings, whether it's one-on-one or with groups. You'll find right here on this page, right below this video, you'll find information about the upcoming class, and I would love it if you would join me. Class size is limited, and all of my classes are always completely full. So make sure you reserve your spot so that you can get a place in the upcoming ICBCH NLP double certification in neuro-linguistic programming and in life coaching. So it was almost 4 years ago that I was teaching an NLP certification course in my office. People were coming from all over the world to come earn their ICBCH training in professional hypnosis in a live seminar format. I was getting ready the night before by reviewing some notes and reading some things, just to, of course, brush up on some of the things that I wanted to talk about. And so I was in bed looking at my books and looking at my notes, and my wife, who is Chinese, and she was actually new in the country at that time, said to me, "What are you studying?" And I said, "Well, I'm studying neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. Do you know what NLP is?" And she said, "No." And so I explained to her that NLP was a system for understanding interpersonal communication, a system for understanding persuasion and leadership, a system for creating a sense of community, for understanding our conscious and our subconscious mind. And she looked over at me and she said, "Oh, like Gueguza." I kind of looked around. I said, "Like what?" She said, "Like Gueguza. He taught NLP." I said, "Well, who is Gueguza?" She said, "You don't know who Gueguza is. Everybody knows who Gueguza is. Why, he's the ghost of Sage Valley. He was the teacher of Su Bin, right? Lao Tzu, the art of war. He was famous." I said, "Well, I've never heard of Gueguza." So I grabbed the laptop and I searched Gueguza, and I came up with very little. And so I searched again. I spelled it differently, and I came up with really very little. I did find a couple of web pages with some references to Gueguza. I found a couple of videos that were in Chinese. I found some books here and there that were written in Chinese, and very little in English about Gueguza. And talking to my wife about who Gueguza was, she explained that his ideas were so powerful that when China, 5,000 years ago, was broken up into little tiny kingdoms, the strategies of Gueguza were used to create a vertical alliance and the dynasty of Qi, the Qi dynasty. And so I thought to myself, well, this is amazing. And some of those kingdoms, of course, were conquered by war. Some of those kingdoms were integrated with agreement and with peace. And I started to study the history of this. It was really pretty fascinating to me. And my wife was right. It is NLP. It is NLP from 5,000 years ago. So in NLP, we concern ourselves with effective communication strategies and patterns. Everybody who registers for my certification courses, they always get a workbook I put together titled Mastering Hypnotic Language Patterns. And it has the language patterns that really Richard Bandler and John Grinder identified in working with Milton Erickson. These are ways to speak more effectively in order to elicit response and to get what you would like to, and to help persuade people to take actions in the case of therapy. And so everybody who I teach in this class, they get this foundational little workbook I put together, covers nominalizations, unspecified nouns, unspecified verbs, referential indexes, presuppositions, cause and effect patterns, double binds, mind reading strategies, conjunctions, time-based connections, all the language patterns that we identify. But when I finally found a translation done by a University of Texas professor of the scrolls of Gueguza, I was amazed. I had it sent to me. I think it took a week or two for it to arrive rather than the usual same-day shipping. And I started to read what Gueguza had written in his scrolls thousands of years ago. And he wrote some basic strategies for communication, and he wrote them in really colorful ways. The art of listening is an important strategy in neuro-linguistic programming. We call this calibrating, right? We want to be able to calibrate the folks who we're working with so that we understand where they are, their point of action. Gueguza talked about calibrating also, and he put it in context of listening to other people. One of my favorite quotes from the scrolls of Gueguza is that when you are listening to a competitor, you should listen as a tongue seeking the marrow from the center of a bone. Wow, what a metaphor. And of course, we know that hypnotic language is filled with metaphors, but Gueguza compared the art of listening to people. How is it that we listen in a way to effectively NLP calibrate? And according to Gueguza, it's to listen with the interest of a tongue seeking the marrow from the center of a bone. And so the ideas in the scrolls of Gueguza are fascinating ideas that can help us to understand effective interpersonal communication. I'm going to read for you a short passage here from the scrolls of Gueguza about how it is we should align our speech with those who we are speaking to in order to be more effective communicators. When you speak to an important person, show your knowledge. When you speak to a knowledgeable person, employ judicious reasoning. Gueguza goes on to say, when you talk to a debater, stress key points. When you talk to a person of power, speak with authority. When you speak to a wealthy person, speak about loftiness. When you talk to a poor person, speak about benefits. By the way, can you see already, if you're interested in applying NLP to copywriting, if you're interested in using NLP as part of political or persuasive speech, how these patterns of communication articulated by Gueguza 6,000 years ago still have practical applications today? When you talk to a low-class person, apply humility. When you talk to a brave person, speak about courage. When you talk to a person who has made mistakes, speak to the point. Gueguza says these are the methods, but we almost always do the opposite. When speaking to intelligent people, Gueguza says, use these methods to enlighten them. And when speaking to unintelligent people, and we all have to do that at one time or another, speak with intent to teach the methods in order to truly impact, reach, and help people. So the scrolls of Gueguza, like the ideas articulated in neuro-linguistic programming, are really practical strategies to help us more effectively communicate with other people. Ever since I read this passage, it's been on a piece of paper that I printed out over my desk. In fact, in the notes down below, you'll actually find this little passage or this little quote. I think it's really a fascinating way to conceptualize how is it that we can speak to persuade, to create agreement, to influence other individuals. This applies, by the way, both in business and in therapy and in our families and in our community and in every area of our life. So Gueguza, the scrolls of Gueguza are really written, summarized in 2 books. There's 2 scrolls, and there are 12 key points that I have identified from the scrolls of Gueguza that I think are pretty darn fascinating. And I think that by sharing these with you, you'll find them fascinating also, and understand how by looking at ancient wisdom, we can actually discover strategies that help us with our modern communication. The first 6 points are put in context of the Tao. The Tao, of course, without getting into religious philosophy with you, is that idea you've all seen, the yin yang, right? The 2 sides. The ideas of Gueguza were in context of the Tao, and so the first 6 points that the Gueguza wrote about, the ghost of Sage Valley, help us to understand that there are 2 sides to every equation. This is balance. In NLP context, it helps us to understand ecology. NLP has an ecology check pattern. We find out if the change that a person's making is the change that's actually going to be most beneficial to them. It's a very Tao concept or idea. So we can look back at our ancient wisdom and find, again, applications for today. The first point of Gueguza is that a door might be open or a door might be closed. Either way, there is opportunity which can be found on either side of it. That's profound, because as we're working with people in therapy to try to help people make change, people often think that once a door is closed, the opportunity has been lost. And we can show people by using the principles of the Gueguza that open or closed, yin or yang, there's opportunity on both sides of the door. Gueguza taught us, number 2, to reflect and respond to spoken word in order to know about other people. We can create connection and we can maximize impact by reflecting or responding. In other words, there's a pattern here of being able to utilize either side of the experience that we're in. The third thing he talks about is the intent of others, and we can enter or exit any situation or scenario, and we can do this at will. We can cause other people to pursue us. Alcoholics Anonymous calls itself a program not based on promotion, but of attraction. In my social media efforts, I rarely am spamming the world with things that I do. Rather, I simply engage and answer questions. In other words, what I'm looking at doing is I am looking at being able to enter and exit a wide variety of different scenarios and situations in a way that attracts people. And the language of Gweguza is so that they miss you like a mother trapdoor spider. Colorful language in the scrolls of Gweguza. Gweguza talks about principle number 4, either breaking or mending. This is important in the context of relationships that sometimes break or are sometimes mended. In the context of business, where sometimes there's the end of business, sometimes there's a beginning of business. Gweguza tells us that connection can be created either by mending or by breaking, and how to do this. He says earth and sky come together and they come apart. They start somewhere and they end somewhere. Connection can be created by understanding the natural laws of make and blend. Number 5. We can either agree or disagree. He tells us that captivating words are persuasive speech. How do you create in your communication the ability to truly develop rapport? Rapport is one of the key concepts of neuro-linguistic programming. But 5,000 years ago, Gweguza was writing about captivating words as a way of creating rapport. He says that to establish authority and manage business, one must investigate both differences and similarities, differentiate truth from a lie, and tell the essence of a speech from an embellishment of speech. These are all strategies very congruent with our ideas of NLP. Number 6 is the principle of either resisting or reconciling. He says it's impossible to make plans and strategies loyal to two sides, which necessitates converting one side to the other. We can do that by either choosing to change and enter somebody else's frame of reference or by drawing them in, again, with rapport, something NLP has focused on. These are the first 6 principles in the scrolls of Gweguza, and they're really fascinating to explore in light of our current understanding of NLP. The next 6 ideas are singular ideas. The idea of weighing, assessing capacity. This is a strategy to calculate the big or the small, and then to strategize in accord with the size of something. We do this in business, but we can do this in love or romance. We can do this in community and relationships as well. He talks about gauging, subtly gauging the desires of others and measuring the depth of our ability to probe them. This could be in context of neuro-linguistic programming as either the Milton model or the meta model. Very similar relationships here to gauging and assessing. The scrolls of Gweguza give us some remarkable ways to do this, because Gweguza tells us that what's occurring as an internal response to somebody will show external signs. And so we're looking for the signs of how it is that others are relating to us. Number 3, assessing. The mouth is a mechanism, according to Gweguza, by which means one can shut down or open up feelings and ideas. The eyes and the ears lend aids to the heart, by which one can discern treachery or malevolence. And the 3, the mouth, the ears, and the eyes, move in coordinate response and move in harmony to strengthen the Tao. Now think of this in context of what Bandler and Grinder taught. Our primary representational system. Do we see the world auditory? Do we see the world visual? Do we see the world kinesthetic? This is really an idea expressed by the Gweguza 5,000 years ago. And we can understand and develop a deeper understanding of NLP, not by limiting our study of NLP to that which we know since the 1970s, but by then applying it to the writings and the teachings of wise leaders from the beginning of time. In fact, the ideas of Gweguza were considered to be so powerful that during the Mao Zedong era in Chinese history, the scrolls of Guiguza were banned from being taught for fear, of course, that it could give people the wisdom to challenge the ideas of the ruling class. The fourth idea in the second set of scrolls is the principle of practice. Guiguza tells us that two parties who share the same aversion are close, but both of them get hurt. When two parties who share the same aversion estrange each other, one of them gets hurt. Therefore, when two people benefit each other and become close, people who cause losses to one another are estranged. And this is the Guiguza's explanation for what divides and what unites people. This again is directly related to the NLP ideas of motivation and the ideas of being able to move with or against different people. Now, one of the key ideas of neuro-linguistic programming is the transderivational search. When we are connecting and building rapport, we want people to look inside of themselves. A primary strategy for doing this is questioning. This is a technique that's very effective in psychotherapy and professional hypnosis and life coaching. Guiguza tells us that all decision makers begin with questions. He tells us that prudent use of questions brings about good fortune. Improper utilization of questioning brings about adversity. NLP shares this idea that questioning is a pathway to creating influence, to creating rapport, and to building alliances, which of course is what happened as the warring states were unified in large part due to the philosophies of Guiguza. His ideas really created a culture, changed a nation, and set history in motion. In fact, the ideas of Guiguza are still used in the highest levels of political negotiation and business acumen in China today. People know who Guiguza is, even though we don't. By the way, I did get even with my wife because she didn't have Western civilization because she went to school in China. So I said to her, well, do you know who Aristotle was? And she had never heard of him. So there you go. It makes sense then why I never heard of Guiguza, because I didn't have Eastern civilization in my high school, even though I now recognize we probably should have had that as well. The sixth principle in the second set of scrolls is that regions governed by principles of civility, savoir-faire, scrupulosity, and serenity enjoy prosperity without exception. As a hypnotist, as a therapist, as a father, as a community member, I'm trying to create serenity. Guiguza gives us the principles that we can bring to our clients to help show them this. There are so many traditions that come from ancient wisdom that we can apply with the lens or the model of neuro-linguistic programming to find effective solutions for the people that come to see us and that we're working with on a professional level. One of the classic books which has long been on my desk is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Most people are familiar if they haven't actually read the book. It's not particularly long. It'll take you about 20 minutes to read it. They're at least familiar with the title. What's fascinating is that Sun Tzu was the student of Guiguza. The ideas that come from the art of war come from understanding the Tao in the context of the way Guiguza taught it. I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, flipping through, looking for some podcasts on different subjects that were of interest to me. And Justin Deal at freedominthought.com has a podcast, and he had an essay about the art of war that I thought was just fascinating, because when you read The Art of War, it is in the context of military strategy. But why has this book endured for so long as a book that people have turned to for individual wisdom to help them experience success in life? And I think that in the essay that Justin Doyle created, and he's an animator, a podcaster, an engineer. He created a YouTube video. In fact, I'll put a link in the notes to his YouTube video and to his website. It was really fascinating. In fact, I want to read the first part of his essay, without any edits, because I think it's really powerful. And again, shows us how a connection from ancient wisdom to modern applications is truly possible. He says, I find my life fluctuates between two internal states, between war and peace. War feels like being fired or falling sick or getting a divorce. It feels like stress, wanting, desire. War feels like dissatisfaction, danger, or being off balance. Peace feels like finding a new job, becoming healthy again, or entering a new and loving relationship. It feels like satisfaction, commitment, satiation, or love. War feels like being asked a question, and peace feels like finding an answer. And although I want everlasting peace, I find war to be the dominant state of my internal life. War acts as a necessary precursor to peace. The essay then, or YouTube animation, actually then goes into taking quotes from Sun Tzu, or Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and then combines them with his own personal experiences to create a set of 9 principles. And this is what NLP does. NLP looks to exemplars, Sun Tzu, and helps us to identify a set of scalable, actionable patterns. You've probably all heard of NLP patterns. And Justin Deal did this by identifying 9 key principles and then applying them to the war and peace we find on a daily basis. Principle 1, war is always possible. Principle number 2, look for the signs of war in your life. Principle number 3, avoid war at all costs. Principle number 4, pick your battles wisely. Principle 5, spend energy in war wisely. Principle 6, adjust the battle plan to end the war as soon as possible. Think about this in context of therapy and people who are warring with depression. This is what I love about NLP, the fast phobia cure. It's a strategy to end that war with anxiety quickly. Number 7, be prepared for loss. Number 8, you are stronger than you think. And principle number 9, appreciate, enjoy, and nurture peace. Essentially a pattern, a strategy from the art of war that has a modern application. I would encourage you to check out in the notes the link I've provided to his animation to his video as he applies it to the context of looking for a job when he was graduating with his degree in engineering. War and Peace, or The Art of War, another ancient text with wisdom for us that we can quantify, that we can replicate, that we can teach to our clients, and that we can take action on. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and it's given you some ideas that you didn't have otherwise. It's just exciting to me to see how ancient wisdom is filled with ideas from exemplars that we can still model today in order to find solutions to our real world problems. The next free webcast that I'm going to be offering is going to be focusing on modern or current NLP exemplars. We're leaving the 70s and 80s in the past, and we're looking into the current era to ask, who are the exemplars that we can be modeling, and what patterns can we distill from these current leaders in order to be effective strategists in navigating the difficulties in the world around us. If you would like to rise to your highest level of peak performance, I would encourage you to join the double ICBCH certification course that's coming up. Join the course and get NLP Professional Practitioner Certification, as well as ICBCH Professional Life Coach Certification. This course is a fascinating course in that it deals with, yes, the very practical foundations of NLP and life coaching that all of us should be familiar with. But it's going to integrate wisdom from the past and the current era. The course is done in a hybrid format. There are online learning modules with video modules, reading materials, audio materials, downloadable printable PDFs, infographics, but we also meet for 9 weeks on Zoom to give us weekly practice sessions where we can actually work with one another apply the techniques and the ideas of NLP, model for each other how we could utilize these techniques, and then, of course, have time to practice them so that when you complete the program, you're fully capable of helping other people. Yes, with ancient wisdom, and yes, with the ideas that come from the foundations of NLP, and yes, with new ideas from new exemplars in our current era. I'm looking forward to having you in our NLP certification course, but every class I offer fills up, and every class I offer is limited in size. I want to make sure that we don't have too big of a class, so we actually have plenty of time to practice. So reserve your spot now. Right below this webcast video, you will find information about how you can register and how you can get your spot for the upcoming double ICBCH NLP and Life Coach certification course. Looking forward to seeing you then, and until then, enjoy the resources that I've provided for you.